The divorce papers landed on Adeze Okafor's bed at 9:17 on a Thursday morning, 11 days after her second chemotherapy session and 4 days before her 41st birthday. She did not cry. She had learned, somewhere around the 3rd week of treatment, that crying took something from you that you needed for other things. She picked the papers up with the hand that still had the IV bruise running from the wrist to the knuckle, read them through twice, then set them on the bedside table beside the small brown bottle of anti-nausea tablets. Her hand did not shake. The papers were already signed. Her husband, Tobena Okafor, had signed them 2 days before, which meant he had gone to a lawyer, had the documents prepared, had sat across from a desk and explained his situation, had brought a pen from his jacket pocket, and had done none of it in the same room as his wife. She did not know yet that he would be married again in 6 days. Adeze had been a woman who kept track of things, not because she was anxious, but because precision was how she loved. The way some people cook from instinct, she had always cooked from measurement. She knew that she and Tobena had been married for 14 years, 3 months, and 18 days. She knew they had a joint account at First City Bank on Bourdion Road that held 42,600 naira, and that she had put 38,000 of it there herself in payments of 2,000 to 4,000 naira every month. From her income as a seamstress on Onitsha Main Market, she knew that the apartment on Aja Street in Lagos was registered under his name, because when they had gone to sign the lease 11 years ago, he had said it was simpler that way, and she had believed him, because at the time she was 29 years old, and he had looked at her the way men look at women when they mean it. She was 40 years old and sick when she understood that simpler that way had meant only one of us will own this. The morning she left the apartment, she wore the dress she had sewn herself 4 years ago, a deep green fabric with small yellow flowers at the collar, fabric she had bought at Balogun Market for 4,100 naira, altered 3 times as her body changed, laundered that very morning in the bathroom sink. The dress was clean. That was the only standard she permitted herself. She carried 2 bags. One held her clothing, folded the way her mother had taught her, each garment pressed flat and stacked in order. The other held her medication, a small tin biscuit box that had belonged to her mother, a notebook she used to record her expenses, and a photograph of herself at 33 taken at a cousin's wedding when she had been 61 kilograms and her hair had been her own. She weighed 48 kilograms that morning. She had not weighed it on a scale. She knew by the way the dress hung. She took the bus to Surulere, to the home of her mother's older sister, a woman named Pauline Akebe, who was 67 and had never once told Adeze what to do. This distinction mattered. Pauline opened the door before Adeze knocked. She stood in the doorway in her house wrapper and looked at her niece the way you look at someone who is still here when they had every reason not to be. She said nothing. She moved aside. Adeze walked into the sitting room and sat in the chair nearest the window, the one that caught the morning light from the east, and set the 2 bags beside her feet. "How long?" Pauline said. "I don't know," Adeze said. Pauline nodded. She went to the kitchen and came back with a cup of ginger tea and a small plate of fried yam, and she set both on the stool beside the chair. Then she sat across the room and picked up the piece of fabric she had been sewing before the knock came, and the 2 women stayed like that in a silence that had nothing painful in it. Those first weeks in Pauline's house were the hardest. Not because Pauline was unkind. Pauline was the opposite of unkind, but because Adeze had always been a woman who organized herself around purpose, and in those weeks the only purpose available to her was survival, which is a purpose that does not have a schedule. She woke at 5:30 every morning out of habit and lay in the dark for an hour before rising. She took her medication at 7 duo, ate the small breakfast the nutritionist had prescribed, 2 boiled eggs, one slice of brown bread, a banana, and then sat in the chair by the window with her notebook and wrote down the number of naira she had spent and the number she had remaining. The remaining column was shrinking. The number in it on the morning she arrived at Pauline's had been 11,400. By the fourth week, it was 3,800. The third chemotherapy session was scheduled for the 18th. The transport alone, 3 buses, because she could not afford a taxi for the whole distance, cost 600 naira each way. She noted this in the column. The oncologist at Reddington Hospital was a man named Dr. Oladele, who had the quality of never pretending that anything was simpler than it was. At the third session, he sat across from her in the consultation room, with her file on the desk between them, and said the treatment was working. He said this without ceremony, the way someone says a true thing. He also said the full course would cost 280,000 naira, more than what she had already paid, and that there were financial assistance options she could apply for, but that none of them moved quickly. He said all of this in one sitting, without looking away from her face. She wrote 280,000 in the notebook on the bus home. She drew a box around it. Then she sat with the notebook on her lap for the rest of the ride, and looked out the window at the traffic on the expressway, which was thick and noisy and going nowhere, and she thought about her hands. Her hands had always been her best feature, though she had never said this aloud to anyone. They were her mother's hands, long-fingered, steady, with the particular quality of knowing fabric by touch, knowing what thread weight would hold in which weave, knowing before a seam was sewn whether it would lie flat or pull. Her mother had taught her to sew at 9. By 12, she had surpassed her mother. By 15, she was taking in alterations for women in their neighborhood in Enugu, and giving the money to her mother without being asked, because the money was needed, and she had hands that could make it. She had kept sewing all through her marriage, all through the years when Tobena's salary from his import business was enough that she didn't need to. Because the work was not about need, it was about the specific and irreplaceable satisfaction of making a thing precisely. She had a way with French seams. The technique of enclosing the raw edge of a seam inside a second fold of fabric, so that the interior of a garment was as finished as the exterior. It took twice as long as a standard seam. Most seamstresses she knew had stopped doing them except on special requests. Adeze had never stopped. She did them on everything. It was a private standard she kept for reasons she had never tried to explain. In the fourth week at Pauline's, the neighbor came. A woman named Mrs. Constance Owusu Boateng, who ran a tailoring operation from her front room 2 houses down, knocked on the gate and asked if anyone in the house sewed. Her assistant had traveled to Kumasi for a funeral, and there was a church program coming in 9 days, and 4 women who needed blouses. Pauline brought her to Adese. Mrs. Owusu Boateng was small with quick eyes and the manner of someone who had made very good decisions for a very long time. She looked at Adese, then at the green dress with the yellow collar, and said, "Did you make that?" "Yes, the seams at the shoulder, French seams. I do them by hand." Mrs. Owusu Boateng looked at her for a moment longer. "Come, let me show you what we have." Adeze finished the 4 church blouses in 6 days. She charged 8,800 naira per garment, 400 naira below the going rate, because she was working on a borrowed machine and did not believe in charging full price for work done on borrowed equipment. Mrs. Owusu Boateng paid without argument. She also called 2 women from her prayer circle that same afternoon. By the time Adeze's 4th chemotherapy session was completed, she had 11 clients, but the money was still not enough. Not for the treatment, not for the transport, not for the nutritionist whose fee she had considered cutting and had not cut. because the nutritionist had told her plainly that what she ate in the next 4 months would affect whether the treatment worked. Adese had read those notes 3 times. She did not cut the nutritionist. She was 3 weeks behind on the hospital payment schedule when Dr. Oladele's administrator, a young woman named Blessing, which struck Adese as the sort of irony that only appeared in actual life, called to say that she would need to settle 85,000 naira before the next session could be booked. Adese said she understood. She thanked her. She hung up and sat with the phone in her hand for a long time. She was in Pauline's sitting room. The afternoon light came through the window at an angle that turned the floor a pale gold color. A bus groaned past on the street outside. She could hear Pauline moving in the kitchen, the soft knock of a wooden spoon against a pot. She opened the notebook. She wrote 85,000. She looked at what was in the remaining column. Then she picked up the phone again and called Mrs. Owusu Boateng. She said she was available to take on additional volume. She asked if Mrs. Owusu Boateng had contacts who might need bulk work done. Mrs. Owusu Boateng said she would make some calls. This was a Friday. By the following Wednesday, Adese had 3 new commissions and a referral to a fashion vendor in the Balagoon market who needed 12 uniform pieces for a staff event. She took it. She worked until 1:30 in the morning, 3 nights in succession, sitting at the borrowed machine in Mrs. Owusu Boateng's front room, while the street outside went quiet around her. She made the 85,000 by Thursday evening. She paid it on Friday morning, traveling to the hospital by herself on 3 buses, the receipt folded inside the tin biscuit box for safekeeping. The bus journey took 1 hour and 40 minutes each way. Lagos in the morning was its own kind of noise: generators, hawkers, car horns, the smell of exhaust and frying akara from a woman by the bus stop who sold breakfast in small newspaper cones. Adese stood at the stop on the way back and bought 1 cone for 150 naira. Because she had walked past that woman every morning for 3 weeks and had not bought anything, and on this particular morning, the morning she had just handed over 85,000 naira and confirmed her next session, it felt like the right morning to stop. She ate the akara standing up in the heat. It was still warm. She noted the 150 in her notebook and stood there a moment with the oil on her fingers and the traffic going past and the sun on her face, and something in the way the morning felt, the ordinary press of it, the smell of it, was so much better than the alternative that she could not quite name what she was feeling, except that it was not grief. She wrote nothing else in the notebook about that day. Sometimes the notation was enough. If this story is reaching you the way I think it is, subscribe now. Because what Adese discovers in the next part of this story is something no one who looked at her on that Thursday morning would have believed possible. The photographs Mrs. Owusu Boateng's daughter had taken of the church blouses were shared to a group chat of Lagos professional women. From there to a WhatsApp community called Niger Women Excel, and from there to a woman named Dr. Zuri Adeyemi Bright, who was 38 years old, ran a consulting firm in the East Legon neighborhood of Accra, and had been looking for 6 months for someone who could produce boardroom-appropriate African print pieces that did not look like they had been made for weddings. Dr. Adeyemi Bright sent a message at 2:41 in the morning asking if the seamstress took commissions for professional wear. Adese answered at 6 poko. She said yes. She gave a price. It was fair. Dr. Adeyemi Bright said yes without negotiating. The first 3 commissions were single pieces: a blazer, a shift dress, a jacket. Adese delivered each on the agreed date. She wrapped them in plain white tissue because she did not have boxes yet, and she delivered them by bus to the cargo agent at the Muratala Mohammed Airport who handled the Accra consignment. The fourth commission was 6 pieces. The fifth was 12. Each garment came back to Dr. Adeyemi Bright, with the interior finished as cleanly as the exterior. A woman at Dr. Adeyemi Bright's office held one of the blazers inside out one afternoon and said, "Who made this?" She had never seen French seams on African print at that volume. Nobody had thought to ask for them, because nobody had believed they were available. The sixth commission was a full capsule wardrobe for a women's leadership retreat in Accra. Dr. Adeyemi Bright flew a Daisy to Accra for the fittings, the flight, a guest house in Osu Oxford Street for 4 nights, and a daily transport allowance of 80 Ghanaian cedis. Daisy had never been to Accra. She sat in the window seat of the 55-minute flight and wrote in her notebook, "I am on a plane. For work. I weigh 51 kilograms. I am better." The retreat was held at a conference center in the Cantonments district. 134 women. Adeze sat at the back for the opening session because she had been invited to observe, and she did not want to take a seat from someone who had paid to be there. She was wearing the duplicate of the green dress, an identical cut in a darker fabric because the original was showing wear at the hem, and she had resewn it from memory without a pattern. A woman sat beside her 12 minutes into the session. She was approximately 60 years old, wore a plainly cut navy suit, and smelled faintly of sandalwood. She did not look at Adeze when she sat. Halfway through the presentation, without turning her head, she said quietly, "The blouses Dr. Adeyemi Bright wore at the reception last night, those were yours." It was not a question. "Yes," Adeze said. The woman was quiet for a moment. "I've been looking for 3 years for someone who can do French seams in African print at scale. Nobody told me. It was never a question anyone asked." She turned and looked at Adeze directly, with the eyes of someone who made assessments once and did not revisit them. "My name is Chief Nana Mensah. I distribute to 42 retail partners across West Africa and the UK. I have been unable to move into professional wear because I cannot find production that holds." She paused. "What is your current capacity?" Adeze had been operating from Pauline's front room with 2 borrowed machines and 1 apprentice, a girl of 19 named Chidinma who had come to her 3 months ago asking to learn. She said, "I can scale." Chief Mensah looked at her a moment longer. Then she opened the small clutch on her lap and placed a card on Adeze's knee. "My production director's number is on the back. Call by Friday. We will discuss what scale means." Adeze looked at the card. Mensah and Associates. Textile and apparel. Accra, Lagos, London. She turned it over. She wrote nothing in her notebook that night. She sat in the guest house room on Osu Oxford Street and held the card and was very still for a long time. She called on Thursday. What followed was not fast. Adeze was suspicious of fast, because fast was the speed at which Tobena had left and the speed at which he had replaced her, and she had learned that speed was usually the pace of people running away from thought. She negotiated the terms of the production contract across 4 phone calls and 1 in-person meeting in Lagos. She asked for revisions on the payment schedule twice. She brought in a lawyer, a woman named Blessing Nwosu, who had been a client and charged her a reduced rate, and was very precise about what she would and would not accept on Adese's behalf. The contract was signed 14 weeks after the conference. By that time, Adeze had completed her final chemotherapy session. Dr. Oladele's office called on a Wednesday morning. The scan results were clear. She was in the middle of cutting fabric when the call came. She set the shears down on the table. She pressed her hand flat against the cloth, a deep blue Ankara with gold threading from Chief Mensah's Accra warehouse. She stood like that for several minutes. Chidinma, who had learned to read the room in the 7 months they had worked together, continued sewing without saying anything. After a while, Adeze picked the shears back up. That evening she opened her expense notebook to the page where she had written 318,000 naira and drawn the first line, the total cost of her treatment. Below the line, she had been recording income for 14 months. She added the most recent payment from the Mensa contract. She drew a second line. The number above it was 1,247,000 naira. She closed the notebook. She put it in the tin biscuit box. The production operation now ran from a rented workspace in Surulere, 40 square meters, 3 industrial machines, Chidinma, and 2 additional seamstresses. A woman named Ama Ngozi, with 17 years of experience, who had been underemployed since her previous employer had closed, and a younger woman named Abena, who had hands Adeze described to Pauline as surgical. The Mensa contract required 240 units in the first quarter. Adeze designed the production schedule herself in the notebook, with Chidinma sitting across asking questions she answered without impatience. The day Tobena saw her was a Tuesday, 3 years and 4 months after the divorce papers. He was walking out of First City Bank on Bordean Road at 11:22 in the morning. She was walking in. She wore a suit she had made herself, deep burgundy, slim at the waist, with Ankara print lining visible only at the cuffs and the collar. She was 57 kilograms. Her hair was natural and cut low. She wore the small gold studs her mother had given her at 22, which she had kept in the tin box through everything and wore now every day. Tobena stopped walking. She did not stop. He said her name. She heard it. She continued toward the door, and a security officer in a blue uniform held it open for her, because she came to this branch often enough that the staff knew her by name, and the officer said, "Good morning, Miss Okafor," as she passed. She was there to discuss the business account she had opened 11 months ago, which, as of that Tuesday, held 4.3 million naira. She met with a relationship manager named Festus, who was 29 and very good at his job. The meeting took 44 minutes. She walked out at 12:09. Tobena was no longer in front of the building. She did not think about this more than once. What mattered, what had always mattered, and what the version of herself lying on that bed reading those papers had not yet been able to see, was not what had been taken. What mattered was what had not been taken. The hands that knew fabric by touch. The mind that counted precisely. The mother's tin box. The green dress washed in the sink. Tobena had looked at a woman at 40 who was sick and tired and 48 kilograms and had seen subtraction. He had calculated what was left and decided the remainder was not worth staying for. He had been doing the wrong arithmetic entirely. What looks like a person at their lowest is very often a person being stripped down to what they are actually made of. The illness had taken the weight and the hair and the certainty and the 14-year marriage. It had not touched the French seams. It had not touched the notebooks. It had not touched the thing in her that knew, without drama and without announcement, exactly what she was worth. You cannot subtract what a person carries in their hands. You can take the building. You can take the account. You can go to a lawyer with a pen in your jacket pocket and sign your name next to hers on a document that ends something. But the thing that makes a person, the discipline, the craft, the quiet love of precision, that does not appear on any balance sheet. It does not diminish when the body does. It does not sign away. The people who think they are handing someone an ending are often, without knowing it, handing them the beginning of the only version of their life that was truly theirs. Adeze Okafor is 44 years old now. She runs the Surulere production workshop with 11 staff. She has a second contract with a UK retailer who found her through Chief Mensa. She went to London twice last year, the second time to deliver a keynote at a conference on African textile entrepreneurship, where she spoke for 22 minutes about what precision means and why she has never once rounded a number. She wore a dress she made herself. Deep green. Small yellow flowers at the collar, the same pattern as the one she had washed in the sink on the worst morning of her life and put on her body because it was clean, and she had made it, and those were the only two things she had needed it to be. The tin biscuit box sits on the shelf above her machine. She has not opened it in a year. She does not need to. She knows what is in it. Now let me ask you something, and I want you to sit with it before you answer. If you were handed a diagnosis, a dissolution, and a door closed in your face, all in the same month, what would you do with the one thing they could not take? Not the job, not the house, not the money, the one skill, the one precision, the thing your hands have always known how to do. Would you trust it before the evidence told you to? Would you know it was enough? Leave your answer in the comments. I want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.